Welcome everyone, Costini here with the discussion about Immortal Empires and Total War Warhammer 3, and to talk about the most recommended campaigns for a new player in the game. Now, this is a video that I did months ago, but things have changed since then. Patches have come and gone, and Creative Assembly has flipped the board on its head with its decision to allow everyone access to Immortal Empires that only has Warhammer 3. And on top of that, the way they've changed their DLC policy, or rather the way they've decided to handle DLC. So now, if you play Immortal Empires, you can get access to certain legendary lords just if you buy their DLC. So for instance, if you want to play an Imperial campaign, you can just buy the Beast and Hunter DLC for Warhammer 2 and get access to Marcus Wolfhardt's campaign. Now that certainly flips the board on its head, because it means you can't assume that people are just going to have access to a certain number of legendary lords, except the ones that come packaged in the base game. And that people can and will have access to certain lords associated with certain DLCs. Now, I've done a whole video on specific DLCs, but in this one I want to talk about recommended campaigns. What motivated me to make the original video on this subject is looking at the list that Creative Assembly recommends, because they recommend Karl Franz for the Empire, which is a really bad choice given the fact that the Empire is in a really bad state as a race. They haven't been updated properly in a fairly long time. They desperately need it. They only got one major rework with Warhammer 2 with the Beast and Hunter DLC, and it wasn't necessarily a great rework either. So the Empire made sense in Warhammer 1 as a recommended campaign. It doesn't make sense in the context of Warhammer 3 to play these guys as one of your first campaigns. I mean, you can certainly do it, you can certainly make an Imperial campaign work, but it's not recommended. Then there is Grand Cathay. Now, Grand Cathay, out of all of the Warhammer 3 races, is actually the best one that they introduced. Well, with the exception of the rework of Warriors of Chaos, if you want to consider that. But here's the thing, while Grand Cathay is a pretty good race, and Miao Ying certainly has a pretty good campaign, the problem is Cathay does have certain mechanics that I would not recommend a new player to tackle, because if you handle them badly, it's going to blow up in your face completely. So playing Cathay in general is something for a more veteran player as opposed to a completely fresh player. They also have severe limitations on their campaign because of the terrain types they can take. So not recommended to play a campaign as Cathay if you're starting out with the game. Though they're certainly one of the best races, or the best race that they introduced in Warhammer 3. And then of course Tyrion for the High Elves. This is actually the only choice that Creative Assembly recommends that actually makes sense, because the High Elves are a pretty good race. They're good for new players. I would highly recommend them if you're just starting out. But out of the 3 choices, this is the only one that actually makes sense. So with that in mind, let me give you my top 5 list of recommended campaigns for beginner players in Warhammer 3. Number 5, we have Be'lakor of the Warriors of Chaos. Now, while the Warriors of Chaos may not necessarily be a race I would recommend to a completely new player, just because they can be a bit of a steamroll and you won't necessarily learn the right lessons when you're starting out with the Warriors of Chaos, but Be'lakor does have several things going in his favor. First off, he is a campaign everyone will have access to. He's also a very powerful campaign, and sometimes for a new player, just having that luxury of having a relatively easy and no stress campaign is actually pretty important. I mean, Be'lakor from without even having to fight the battle can get all of these units really right from the very start of his campaign, and then he just goes here, even on legendary, auto-resolves the first 2 battles that he does have as part of his campaign. And then he gains control of a Dark Fortress, and after that there is another settlement to the north where he can subjugate that faction and gain 2 vassals from very early on in his particular campaign. And one of the things to mention about Warriors of Chaos is that Dark Fortresses are very safe. Very rarely have I seen the AI attacking a Dark Fortress, and this is playing on Legendary as I do the vast majority of my campaigns. Very rarely do I see that happen, and typically speaking, it's frontline Dark Fortresses that haven't had the time to grow to build up their garrisons. Like a proper Dark Fortress in your core territory, I've never seen that being attacked. So Warriors of Chaos have a great deal of power and safety behind their campaigns. They're very safe, and in particular because you can get 2 vassals as Be'lakor very quickly in your campaign, it means you are going to have 2 armies that are just going to be dedicated to the defense of the homeland, so to speak. Now, of course, you can still be invaded and can still lose them, but you do have a great deal, you have a huge safety net. Now, Be'lakor does have benefit to demonic units. He has no limit on gifted units in his army. He has an upkeep benefit for demonic units. He also starts with all of the undivided chaos or all of the chaos god slots over here in the Gifts of Chaos. So he has access to all of their powers from the beginning of their campaigns. And Be'lakor is the second most powerful legendary lord for the Warriors of Chaos and one of the best in the entire game. He does also get various other benefits for his armies, specifically when it comes to demons. So he's a powerful engineering lord. Now, the reason I would recommend this campaign is you will have to deal with at least vassals and managing the legion system, the war coordination system, with this particular campaign in a way that you may not have to do so in many other campaigns. On top of that, you also have a great deal of flexibility in this campaign because between Be'lakor's starting position as well as one of his mechanics, core mechanics, he has a lot of flexibility in this campaign. So I think this kind of campaign can be a great learning tool. A lot of campaigns can be pretty straightforward in how you go about things, whereas as Be'lakor, you do have options. Now, some are better than others. The best option is to go for either the Northern Chaos Waste or to go for Norsca, to conquer Norsca and unify it under your banner, because that will give you access to a lot of Dark Fortress sites. Or start with Norsca, then go into the Northern Chaos Waste, or start with the Northern Chaos Waste, then go into Norsca. Pretty good, solid decisions over there in your campaign. But you also have the opportunity to go east into the Empire, or south into Bretonnia, or southwest into Ulthuan, or west into Nagron. So you have a lot of choices in this campaign, just from the starting location in the Warhammer version of Britain in Albion over here. But then there's another campaign mechanic that Be'lakor does have. He has these portals. He starts with one in his initial starting province, and he also has the ability of using that portal to get into the middle of the Empire in Ostermark, and also to go into the Southern Chaos Waste. So he has a lot of flexibility in his campaign from the very beginning of it. And I think that's what makes for a good campaign, especially for a new player that's trying to figure out the world, trying to explore the world, all that kind of good stuff. I think this is really a good campaign in a lot of ways for people to learn the game, or at least learn about the world, learn about exploration, and having a relatively easy time of it when it comes down to the options that they have available, the foes they have to deal with. Certainly not a campaign that is very enjoyable for a veteran player, because, well, it can be enjoyable for a veteran player, but you can also steamroll the entire campaign relatively easily playing as Be'lakor if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing, if you're trying to figure it out, I would recommend this campaign. It is a powerful campaign, it is a powerful legendary lord, and it is available to everyone that has access to Immortal Empires. I would argue this is the recommended campaign that Creative Assembly should give of the Warhammer free races. Or rather, the Warhammer free legendary lords. At number 4, it is Boris Ursus of Kislev. Now, I would not recommend playing either Katrin or Kostaltin in Total War Warhammer free, because they have pretty bad campaigns. However, Kislev was designed as a race for new players, and there's a lot of things that do make that work. The problem is the design of the campaigns that Katrin and Kostaltin have don't work very well with that. But then you have Boris Ursus, which does work very well with the more positive traits that Kislev has as a race. So as Boris Ursus, you start with the Patriarch, so right off the bat, you're gonna have 8% casualty replenishment in your army. And then you have 2 Tsar Guard, 2 Armor Cossars, 2 Warbear Riders. Now, this is a substantial enough army that even on legendary and very hard battle difficulty, you can just go in a lot of early game battles and auto-resolve them, and also recover from those battles very, very easily without too much hassle. That is a substantial amount of power that Boris Ursus does have in his campaign. Now, of course, to get access to this campaign, you need to unlock Boris Ursus in the Realms of Chaos, but it's very easy to do so. I'll post a link at the end of this video. to a guide that I made on how to do it very quickly and very efficiently. There's also mods, I believe, on the Steam Workshop that do it for you. Now, what you want to do in this particular campaign, because you do start in the Northern Chaos Wastes, and you can stay and fight here. It is unpleasant climate, but it also gives you devotion, which can give you invocations, give you access to more priests, structures, churches in particular. So there are certain advantages to a Northern Chaos Waste campaign. But your better campaign plan is to spend 2 turns, just 2 turns, building an army, building a bunch of Cossars, replenishing your losses, leveling Boris Ursus with Inspiring Presence and Root Marcher, giving the Patriarch Orson's Roar and replenish troops. So you're going to have 11 casualty replenishment right off the bat over here, and starting to research as well ice sculpting. And then you can go over here, take the Frozen Landing, take this entire territory, go to war against Prague, or just wait for diplomacy to play strict, like trade territory to Prague. They'll like it, they'll enjoy it, and take Helpit in the process. Take Helpit as your capital. Like a full army with the forces you have should be able to deal with Fraught very, very easily in this particular campaign. So it can be a campaign that starts very easily, and Kislev does have a lot of really good units for a new player. Like, their economy is not great necessarily, but they do have, because of the hybrid units, they do have some pretty good choices between regular Cossars being pretty solid range units, though they do cost more than dedicated range units because they're also hybrid units, so they're going to be more expensive than Goblin Archers, to which they're basically equivalent to. Then you have Armor Cossars as a pretty solid hybrid ranged melee option. And then, of course, things like Streltsy, Bear Cavalry, War Bear Riders, Little Groms as artillery pieces. Kislev does have quite a few things on offer, and Boris Ursus is by far and away the best legendary lord of Kislev. Like the other two, I would not recommend playing their campaigns, but as Boris Ursus, you do get quite a few benefits, be it construction time, construction cost to certain structures, and on top of that, you also can resettle in all provinces. You can resettle everywhere for no cost. What that means is if you see a ruined settlement and you want to take it over, it doesn't cost you to do so. You also get more construction cost and time benefits, diplomatic benefits with Kislev, and crucially, you're not limited or hindered by the supporter system in the same way that Catherine and Castalton are. See, here's the problem. If you're playing as either Catherine or Castalton, you're going to be severely limited because you need to reach a lot of supporters, 600 supporters, to confederate the others. So if you're playing as Catherine, you want to confederate Castalton to get control of his city and the major benefits he has because of the structures in that city. You need to get 600 supporters. Boris Ursus has no diplomatic limitations. He could outright conquer both Catherine and Castalton cities, or he can confederate with them much earlier on. So the most power in a Kislev campaign is in the hands of Boris Ursus simply because of that. And also, you have access to more terrain types, so you can settle in the Wasteland, which is actually pretty substantial because you can take Helpit, you can take the Darklands, you can take the Badlands, you can conquer a lot of the territory in the Empire and Bretonia and Estalia and Tylea and the Badlands and the Darklands and the Mountains of Morn. A lot of the territory that you start next to. And even the Chaos Waste, although they're unpleasant climate, they are still colonizable. And Boris Ursus himself has an immunity to Chaos Waste's attrition and an upkeep benefit for Warbear Riders. He's a pretty powerful legendary lord. His campaign is a steamroller campaign, or as close to a steamroller campaign as you will get with Kislev. Just abandon your initial province, head over to Frozen Landing, and enjoy your campaign a lot more if you do so. So yeah, recommend it if you're starting the game. You just need to take a couple of steps there. But once you get going with this campaign, it is certainly a really solid campaign for a completely new player with the game. Now, number 3, we have Morathi of the Dark Elves. It's really more so about the Dark Elves than Morathi in this particular case, though I think Morathi has probably the kindest campaign start of any Dark Elven Legendary Lord in the game. I mean, the easiest one to get a hold of, at the very least, when it comes down to it, because she doesn't have major foes to fight. But really, it's the Dark Elves that turn the spot on this list, because the Dark Elves are a pretty solid race. They have solid melee options, with Blackheart Corsairs being particularly good units with high armor, high leadership, and then, of course, things like Dark Shards with shields, artillery options at tier 3, good hero selection, good lord selections, good legendary lord selections as well. the Dark Elves are a pretty good race because they don't descend into farcical levels of power as many other good races do. I mean, the Dark Elves are powerful, but they also have some drawbacks, specifically in maintaining control of their territory, managing the slave economy, the fact that they lack global recruitment options and instead have to rely on local recruitment as well as getting black arcs. Now, Morathi herself actually starts in a pretty good position because she doesn't have major foes to start to fight from the very beginning of her campaign. She has 2 entire provinces that she can easily take over. So she has the Titan Peaks, and then she does have the Bleak Coast. The Ashen Coast is something I would ignore. I would take Iron Spike and maybe deal with the Skaven over here, because there is a minor Skaven faction, and then give the territory to Mazdamundi in order to get a good diplomatic relationship with him. Or you could ally with the Skaven and take on Mazdamundi, though that's not necessarily recommended because the jungle is not pleasant climate. And once you do secure these 2 provinces in the Titan Peaks and the Bleak Coast, you do have a lot of options. You can go north, you can go east into Ulthuan, pick the fight with the High Elves, for which you are actually quite well suited to tackle. Or you can head north and meet Malekith and Confederate Malekith, knock some sense into the boy, and then with him at your side, take over the entirety of Nagrand and then go for Ulthuan. But it is a pretty straightforward campaign of a race that's pretty good, but not so good to the point that you're just going to steamroll the campaign with no effort. You are going to have to learn to play the game in order to handle a Dark Elven campaign. I think that's what makes them, as a race, ideally suited at the moment for any kind of player, be it a veteran player or a new player. Like, for a veteran player, what's great about playing a Dark Elf at the moment is that you're not just going to have a free ride. You are playing a powerful race, but you do also have some drawbacks you're going to tackle. For a new player, they have a good army roster that's ideally suited to dealing with a lot of the foes. Specifically, Black Ark Corsairs are some of the most powerful early game units. Yes, I do count tier 3 as early game units. Besides, you can always get Black Ark Corsair units from a Black Ark once you get the Slave Pens building, and that is something you can construct very quickly because you just need a tier 2 settlement. So once you get the tier 2 settlement, like, I would not necessarily delete any structure here, but you can get the Black Ark, use that for recruitment options. And once you do that, you can recruit Black Ark Corsairs from really tier 2, from very early on in your campaign, and they're a very good and effective unit. I find that playing a Dark Elf campaign at the moment in Warhammer 3 is really solid. Now, Morathi does have a good start position. She also benefits from Slaaneshi Corruption. Don't bother about the demonites, they're not good units, but she does benefit from Slaaneshi Corruption, which is going to give her an economic boost compared to the other Dark Elven Legendary Lords. Beyond that, she does get a benefit to loyalty, a cooldown to sacrifice to Hecate, slave cost to sacrifice to Hecate. So it's this one that gives you experience for sorceresses and hero action success chance, and as well as Winds of Magic. Not particularly too beneficial when you look at it. She does start with a powerful city with the Catacombs of Quintex that give you quite a bit of growth, research, control, a decent amount of income, and income from old buildings in the local province. On top of that, Morathi does have a pretty solid enough skill line, though you do have to decide between Insidious or Tenacious. Which one is better? Well, that is a bit of a discussion, because you can get some pretty powerful army benefits with Insidious, but if you go with Tenacious, you do get casualty replenishment, diplomatic relations with some factions, though not necessarily ones that are worth it. But crucially, you would get the minus 30% upkeep for your army. Or you could go with a significant benefit to Shades and Dark Riders, as well as Doomfire Warlocks. That is the decision you can make. Or a 5% campaign movement range for all characters faction-wide. I personally would probably go with Insidious, though obviously there are benefits to Tenacious as well. So you do have some choices over here. You have plenty of choices as well, like geographically speaking. You could fight the war with Lustria if you so desire. Or you could head north, unify Nagrand, and then invade Ulthuan. Or you can just straight up beeline it for Ulthuan once you've taken over these 2 provinces. Those are some of the choices that are available in this campaign. And Morathi is one of the more powerful Legendary Lords for the Dark Elves. Like, I would recommend Malekith more from the perspective of his campaign mechanics for new players. The problem is Malekith's starting situation is a bit complicated. Not because of the Skaven he has to deal with, or even the angry dwarf that wants to put his head on a spike, but because Malekith has one of the deadliest foes to contend with early on in a campaign, and that's Valkia the Bloody. And that is not the fight you would recommend for someone who's trying to learn the game to deal with, because Valkia is an absolute insanity to deal with in any particular battle for any player on any skill level. So Malekith's not recommended. Lokir could be a really good campaign. Like if you're looking at the Dark Elves, like Lokir Felheart over here in Cafe could be a really good campaign. The thing is, you need to be very careful and strategic with Lokir to really make the most use out of his campaign. So you need to know how to play the game properly in order to really utilize Lokir in a very effective manner. But he's certainly a very powerful lord as well. And then, of course, there's Malice Darkblade and Hellebrand. And Rakarth as well. Who doesn't like Rakarth? But it's more about Dark Elves over here than it is about Morathi herself. I just think she's got the kindest starting situation of all of the Dark Elven Legendary Lords, and the least complicated campaign when it comes to dealing with your situation overall. Like, it's fairly straightforward. You take over your provinces, then you go after Nagorond or Ulthuan. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, pretty easy to understand. And you want to avoid fighting in the south by taking territory and selling it to the Lizardmen. That should give you a military alliance with Hexoatl. A fairly straightforward, solid enough campaign and easy enough to understand. And number 2, we have Tyrion of the High Elves. Tyrion has been consistently one of the most powerful legendary lords in the game ever since he was introduced in Warhammer 2, and he's always had a good campaign for new players, because it's a fairly straightforward and simple enough to understand campaign. Ulthuan is not necessarily the easiest starting position in the world, but where Tyrion starts on Ulthuan certainly is one of the best starting positions, because you start with Lothern, which is a major settlement that has a lot more slots, so you have a lot of flexibility with Lothern when it comes to what you're building there, how you're making use, what kind of economy you're building up, what kind of army you're building up, and you have a province with 4 regions, so that's a huge economic potential there. And here's the thing, a lot of the factions that you're surrounded with are friendly. In particular, you have 2 other legendary lords over here, like Alariel and Elfarion, both of which are fairly friendly towards you. And you can make a grand elven coalition very quickly with the 2 of them, and conquer the rest of Ulthuan, divide it between the 3 of you, and then go to war against everyone else that might oppose you. You do have quite a few options over here. You can take out Morathi. My recommendation in this particular campaign, conquer Atane, then maybe conquer Calador, or if you want to be a bit more risky, you can go for Safri, because Alariel certainly will be going for Safri one way or another, so you can go for Safri yourself in this campaign early on, or you can wait for Alariel to do so. But yeah, you could also go for conquering Calador, dealing with Noctilus. Your army is substantially better than he is, going for Terranok, and then going to deal with Morathi. You do have some choices, or conquering some of this territory in southern Everest and trading it to Elfarion for better diplomatic relations. Always remember this aspect: if you trade away territory to another faction, it can give you a lot of money, but it will also significantly help your diplomatic relations with those factions. Now, Tyrion does get a major upkeep to the main High Elven units, even if you don't have any DLC. So he's getting a huge benefit to Spearmen, and archers in particular, which are 2 of the main units that you would use as a high elf. He's also got the skill line that's focusing either on faction-wide benefits or on combat benefits. Now, personally speaking, I believe that it's better to focus on the Majesty of Ulthuan as opposed to the Bloodline of Venarian, because yes, it's a lot of melee attack, weapon strength, leadership, and all that. But Tyrion is already a pretty powerful lord when it comes to that. So getting diplomatic relations, getting income from buildings, getting recruitment costs, global recruitment duration, global recruit capacity, and minus 10% upkeep for all armies, that's a lot more substantial than the alternative. By default, you get 10 diplomatic relations to High Elves, construction time minus 50% for the Shrine of Cain. So you can get the Sword of Cain very quickly in a you can get the Sword of Cain quicker in a campaign as Tyrion, though it's probably best to wait for someone else to get it. Specifically, Alariel usually will get it, and then you confederate her, and that might be one of the better ways of picking up the Sword of Cain if you're playing as Tyrion, as opposed to trying to deal with the uninhabitable climate over here in the Northern Wasteland. And your campaign objectives are to basically wipe out the Dark Elves, more or less, and to control all of Wolf Ones. The main problem you're actually going to encounter is wiping out Rakarth. For whatever reason, Rakarth has a great deal of durability, but the way to get to Rakarth would be to actually go wipe out Malekith first, then use the sea lane over here, which will teleport you all the way here. And then from there, you can start moving south to dealing with Rakarth. Just do that with several armies, Rakarth won't stand a chance. Or just go directly for him, take him out, wipe him out. That is a really good way of playing this campaign. But yeah, a powerful lord in a powerful campaign with a relatively easy start position and a relatively straightforward campaign plan. The only complication that you might face in this campaign is actually Be'lakor, because Be'lakor tends to declare war on a faction in Wolf One and evade with large armies. Though he's generally more of a speed bump than anything else. It's kind of laughable in my High Elven campaigns when I'm playing and Be'lakor declares war on me. He shows up with a stack, I kill him, and I get this defeat rate, which is actually really good. And so I end up rotating my lords so I can get the defeat traits, on all of them and get significant benefits on all of my lords, or a good portion of my lords. It's kind of hilarious. You can easily bait Be'lakor in attacking, like especially if you take control of Crix, and you can just basically trait farm him for his really good and powerful trait. But Tyrion's campaign, it's got a lot going for it. It's a good campaign. It's a solid start position. It's a good lord. And it's an easy to understand faction that also has a great deal of scalability in its economy, because the High Elves have two things really going for them from late game booming potential. One, their main economic building produces trade resources. This will help you get more trading partners and will generate you more gold because, yeah, you're trading more resources. Because each elven trinket can be a pretty solid amount of gold. I can't show it here because I don't have any trade partners at the moment, but it can be a solid amount of gold. But the other thing that the elves also have is that they get Elven Embassy, which also increases their income from trade tariffs. Now, if you're getting a trading partner in your campaign,
of the Phoenix,
one of the things to mention
of the Phoenix Court.
is a good portion of the income from trading is actually going to come from these tariffs. Each Elven Embassy does improve that, and there's other ways to do so even further in your campaign
Those who
as playing
speak the truth, the
as
time
the High
is
Elves.
now.
So lots of benefits to the High Elves: powerful race, powerful economy, and powerful legendary lord. And finally, and number one, is Grimgor Ironhide. Grimgor is a blunt instrument. He's one of the most powerful duelists in the game, and he's a pretty brutish legendary lord. And his campaign reflects that. It is a very simple-minded, very easy to understand campaign, which can be great for a new player to figure out some of the mechanics of the game and figure out how to get a handle on things. You have 10% campaign movement range, you get an upkeep benefit for Black Orcs and Big Guns, and WAs have a chance to contain Black Orcs. You also have the ability to recruit Black Orc Big Bosses from any provinces, so from turn 1 you can recruit them. Grimgor's skill line, well, his lord effects, he gets more income from post-battle loot, armor for Black Orcs, leadership for Black Orcs, the ability You're Next, which is kind of hilarious because it basically means I'm going to kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what You're Next does. I mean, it just puts a major debuff on an enemy for 24 seconds that will make it so they can't run away, they won't be able to do damage, and they'll take a significant amount of damage in return. Now, you also get Grimgor's Wa as opposed to regular Wa, and then you get hero capacity for Black Orcs, armor, piercing, leadership, etc., etc. But Grimgor's campaign situation, well, the Greenskins are one of the best races in the game at the moment, and they're a very simple and easy to understand race. The more you fight, the more up you build up the WA meter. When the WA meter builds up, you get all of these benefits, and then you can declare the WA. You'll still keep these benefits of growth, control, leadership, recruitment cost, and Winds of Magic, but you can declare a WA. And when you declare a WA, every army is going to get a WA army associated with it, which means you can bring 40 units per stack to a fight. That's a significant amount of units that you can bring to a fight. Furthermore, though, you have a good economy, you have the ability to recruit a lot of units each turn, you have a good army selection, a good hero selection. The lord selection choices are not necessarily the best, but you do have a lot of things going for you if you decide to play a greenskin campaign. Now, what's also pretty fitting for greenskins, trade doesn't exist. Diplomacy is, well, diplomacy is not something you should bother with, really. Especially when you're dealing with fellow greenskins, because orc diplomacy, greenskin diplomacy should be, I'm going to smash your face in and then you're going to follow me. And that's what you do with your fellow greenskins. Now, another thing about Grimgor's campaign is it's pretty straightforward, very simple to understand. The only challenge you have in this campaign potentially is Kolic, and not necessarily so. You can, to a certain degree, at least avoid a war with Kolic. But you take him out, you trade away the challenge stone, which he's going to build up as a Dark Fortress. You trade that away to the Norskins here, and your northern flank is secure. You don't have to bother with it. And then all of this territory that's controlled largely by the ogres is yours for the taking, as are the Darklands. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple, pretty easy to grasp campaign and easy to play. So it's a good learning tool of a campaign. I mean, there are better legendary lords out there like Azag and Grom. They're better, I'd argue, given their campaigns, but their campaigns do require a bit more experience to be able to deal with them. Whereas Grimgor's campaign, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Just turn one, take this element, get a bunch of goblin archers. If you have the King the Warlord DLC, you would want to get rid of this. Eventually, you would want to get the tier 2 barracks, but right now, you just want to get rid of this and get the idols, so you can get the grove, so you can get the settlements to a higher level. But rely a lot on goblin archers, and eventually get the black orcs, get the higher tier units, the night goblins, the black orcs, the big ones, and then just annihilate everyone in your path, because you're the top dog in this campaign situation. Grimgor, on any difficulty, carves out a massive empire against the factions here in the Mountains of Morn and in the Darklands, because he doesn't really have any direct opposition, and he is far stronger than Kolic's Sun Eater. Or rather, Kolic can put up a decent fight, but you're the Greenskins. You have the ability to bring in massive amounts of armies to the fight. Like, why bring a stack of 20 units when you can bring 2 stacks with a WA, so you can bring 80 units? And that's something you can achieve pretty early on in your campaign, giving you a great deal of power, a great deal of flexibility in your campaign. Is a campaign I would highly recommend for everyone to play in general, but especially for new players. And that's all there is to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.